Commonwealth's attorneys and I have concluded that the NCAA sanctions were overreaching and unlawful.
Someone's got to develop a product that you and I as a consumer are going to want to buy.
The country needs a comprehensive energy plan.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of For the Record. I'm your host, Andrew Calista. Joining me right now, alumni elected trustee, and alumni is the key word in that, Penn State trustee Anthony Lubrano. Trustee Lubrano, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a magical week for Penn State and a lot in the Penn State community. What does that mean in terms of overall the Joe Paterno situation and where we're going in the post-Sandusky era?
Well, I think today's announcement of a settlement with the NCAA is a victory for Penn State because essentially the NCAA acknowledged their overreach in imposing the sanctions that they did. You know, the restoration of the victories, of course, is something that all of the Penn State community across the country, but particularly in Center County, are happy to see. People like myself who really got involved for something bigger than football, it's a good day because due process has prevailed.
A lot of people, and I saw this on ESPN when the announcement was made, the comment was made, a lot of people aren't happy with the use of the word victory regarding today's action. What would you say to those people that are saying it's so one-sided, you're still football-centric out in Center County?
Yeah, I would say that they really need to come here and spend a little bit of time to understand that this has nothing to do with football. Of course, the reality is that Louis Freeh created that narrative. The NCAA played on that narrative, and as an institution, we haven't worked hard enough to correct that narrative. But fact of the matter is, and I travel the country, people who have loved Penn State continue to love Penn State, and people who hated Penn State and Joe Paterno continue to hate Penn State and Joe Paterno. So you're not likely to change their minds either way.
The power block of trustees that I like to refer, that the votes are always 16 or 17 to the alumni elected 9. What did you gauge their reaction to be when this news started to leak out that this was a possibility?
Well, I communicated via email with Chair Mosser on the 5th of the month in the hopes that he would share with me what I was hearing. I had actually learned of the settlement discussions and specifics of those settlement discussions, which ostensibly included much of what we saw today with one exception, which was rather significant. Chair Mosser did not acknowledge my communication, and so I reached out to him yet again on that Thursday via a call. He didn't respond to that, which resulted in the public communication that Trustee Lord and I released to the media on Monday with the hopes that, quite frankly, we can get some information. I didn't hear from any of the trustees, so I reached out to several of my colleagues who are not alumni elected trustees, and they represented to me that they had no knowledge of any pending settlement. I take them at their word that they didn't know. So, you know, in the end, we were all pleased that we can move on to something else, but we still know there's plenty of work to be done.
3 years and 3 months ago, we were all told this would be a distant memory, that nobody was going to remember anything that happened in November of 2011. Obviously, that's not the case.
Yeah, I think former Chair Peets made that comment. I think she said that by the time we hire the next president, this will be a distant memory. We know that that didn't, in fact, happen, and I think people have intensified their efforts to seek the truth. And I give credit to Treasurer McCord and Senator Corman, because through their efforts, we learned, we gained information, vital information to help us understand what took place. Because frankly, we're all still wondering how former President Erickson could sign a consent decree. How could he sign something without consulting the full board? And as it turned out, he was hoodwinked by President Emmert of the NCAA, and as I've said before, and I'll say it again here today, Mark Emmert's a sanctimonious hypocrite. He just proved that with what's happened here.
You brought up Senator Jay Corman. WHVL and For the Record has reached out to his office. We expect to hear back very soon to get him on this program. What was the alumni trustees, how did they interact with the Corman-McCord lawsuit? And as well, if you could divulge any information of the Paterno family lawsuit, if there's been any sharing of the information, what either has gathered through litigation.
What I can tell you is that there are a number of trustees who have relationships with both Senator Corman and Treasurer McCord, and both shared information from time to time. Because of the unique situation that Trustee Lord and I have in this, that is with our relationship with all the parties, our hope was that we could try to engineer a global settlement, global meaning all of the parties in both of the lawsuits. That didn't materialize. Today's agreement is only part of what needs to be completed. The Paterno lawsuit will continue. They will benefit from all of the information that was gathered in discovery in the Corman-McCord action, and given the competency of the counsel that the Paternos have, Wick Solers and his firm, I have no doubt that they will prevail as well.
Where does Penn State go from here at this moment? Because still there are questions that remain.
Well, Trustee Lord and I have to talk about the response we received from outside counsel to our request for access to the free files. They forwarded us a confidentiality agreement along with a cover letter. We're not in agreement with all of the terms, and so we have to decide how we move forward there. That to us is still something we hope to complete. The fact that we've settled with the NCAA doesn't render moot the issue of our review of Free's report, because so far as I can tell, that's still something overhanging in the alumni community, certainly. Louis Free cast us as having been a bad culture, more concerned with the well-being of football than the well-being of children.
We are talking Penn State Board of Trustees with alumni elected trustee Penn State Anthony Lubrano. Back with more on For the Record right after this. Welcome back to For the Record. We are talking the restoration of the 409 wins of Joe Paterno and the 1 win of head coach Tom Bradley while at Penn State. Joining us on set, Penn State alumni elected trustee Anthony Lubrano. Trustee Lubrano, the news that happened this past week, a lot of people took it as, I don't want to say a grain of salt, but there's been some hesitation that this isn't everything that needed to happen. Your opinion on those people saying this was not a total victory?
I understand their point of view. I told some of your colleagues earlier today that that my first reaction to the proposed settlement was a bit of disappointment, because I wanted the consent decree to be voided ab initio from the beginning, and by voiding it ab initio, everything gets returned. But having said that, there's still an opportunity for that to happen in the Paterno action, and so you have to gauge what you can get, what's achievable versus what you hope to get. And in this case, you take this action to trial, presume that you win, they appeal, and the appeal takes an extended period of time. You may not win on appeal. You may win on appeal. Who knows? But you have to weigh that against the settlement that occurred today. But I understand what people feel. I mean, there are some who wanted their foot on the jugular. I mean, you got them down, you make sure they stay down. I think, though, that by the very nature of the comments that Jay Corman made today, it's clear the NCAA is reeling, and now we have to get a few of the other elements completed. For example, the athletic integrity agreement. As a result of the parties to that agreement, the NCAA, Penn State, and the Big Ten, that agreement couldn't be voided today, because today's agreement's between the NCAA and Penn State, Corman, and McCord. But I can promise you that President Barron is immediately working on it, because none of us want to pay any more money to Georgia Mitchell. None of us do. And I would be surprised if that's not resolved very, very quickly. The same holds true with the Big Ten. We're not happy with the fact that they withheld bowl proceeds over the last 3 years.
Did that come up today?
It did.
Or this past week in the trustee meeting about the Big Ten and keeping bowl money?
It did. And I can assure you that's a conversation Trustee Barron, he's a trustee, President Barron has already undertaken with the Big Ten, the presidents, Commissioner Delaney.
A lot of people pointed to the NCAA announcement today and said there was incendiary language within that.
Yeah.
Your take on what their release said?
Yeah, just everybody relax. Don't get too excited. It's just the nature of the NCAA. They're really all about themselves, and as you read today, it's about the children, when in fact the last thing they were concerned with was the $60 million. So they were more than happy to let others control the $60 million. Mark Emmert's a sanctimonious hypocrite. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The actions of the NCAA today again proved what I've just said.
The NCAA, they've actually done nothing nationally to protect a child. Meanwhile, you have many Penn State alumni, Penn State students that have been very much involved since even before November, and more even so after November of 2011 with that. You've been one of the, I'll use the term firecracker on the board since you were elected over 3 years ago. You're coming up for re-election, but a lot of Penn Staters point to you as carrying the banner. How satisfied are you today, just on a personal note?
Yeah, it was a bit of an emotional letdown for me, frankly. When I learned that this discussion was ongoing and I couldn't get information, I was frustrated. When I heard the terms that were being discussed, I was more frustrated. And then when we were briefed today of the actual terms, my initial reaction was I can't vote for this because the consent decree isn't being voided ab initio from the beginning. Because I have always held the NCAA lacked the authority to impose any sanctions, and I guess if I would have played that to its natural conclusion, I would have voted no. But what would that have gained? In the end, yeah, I'm a principled person, no question about it. But the NCAA, by virtue of its conduct today, by their willingness to restore those victories, by their willingness to basically to repeal the consent decree, they said that they overreached. They've acknowledged that they were wrong. They didn't use the words, and I know some of us in the community would have liked to seen them step forward and say, we apologize, we were mistaken. Again, I understand how people feel.
Aren't you pretty much relying on the media members to read between the lines as if we were politicians, to read between the lines of what the NCAA said? I know Senator Corman said it on Friday in his press conference that, yeah, they caved on this. This is equivalent to a mercy rule, I believe was the exact term that he used. There's got to be some hesitation amongst Penn Staters to rely on the media to rewrite the history book since they were already rewritten once before.
Well, I don't rely on the media to do anything for me, so I'm out there with the same narrative, and that narrative is very simple. We don't have a culture problem. We've never had a culture problem. Joe Paterno had more integrity in his little finger than Mark Emmert has in his entire body, and the last guy I would have ever expected to conceal or cover up to protect a program would be Joe Paterno, because he just wouldn't do it. And what disturbs me more than anything else is that people in the media portrayed him in that way. And there are some people who knew better because they knew Joe a long time. And I'll give you an example. I considered attending the Michigan State Board meeting last month because the president of Michigan State is also now the chair of the executive committee. It happens that I have a friend on the board of Michigan State. It happens that George Perlis, the former head coach at Michigan State, is also on the board. And I reached out first to George, not knowing him, and George's reaction to me was, I knew Joe. There's no way. This was so wrong. And then my friend convinced me that it was best for him to arrange a meeting with the president of Michigan State rather than show up and maybe embarrass the president. Now, we haven't had that meeting yet, but the point I'm making to you is that we as Penn Staters have to continue about our business the way we have every day, which is you put your shoes on one at a time, you work hard, you do a good job, and you show the world what we are. We know that. Joe showed us that by example every single day. There are going to be haters. I tell Sue Paterno this all the time. There are going to be haters who will never change. They hated Joe before. They're going to hate Joe later. There are people who love Joe. They loved Joe before. They love Joe now. That'll never change. So in the end, it's up to us.
We're talking the restoration of Coach Paterno's 409 wins. And where do the trustees go from here? Is this finally the straw that brings the entire board together? You are watching For the Record on WHVL. Welcome back to For the Record. Trustee Anthony Lubrano in studio. Trustee Lubrano, is this finally the straw? The NCAA and Penn State and Senator Corman, the settlement of that lawsuit, is this finally the one thing that could actually get a trustee vote unanimous?
Well, we were unanimous today. Whether we can do that on future votes on issues that are difficult remains to be seen. I mean, we still have a lot of work to do on this board. There's a fair amount of distrust, and it's going to be difficult for us to mend some of those fences, simply because, in my view, we don't listen to each other. And in my case, I can tell you, since the day I joined the board, there is a tendency among some of my colleagues not to listen to what I had to say because they were so focused on the fact that I was critical of them during my campaign to be seated on the board. I'd like to think I've gotten a little better with how I handle myself on the board, but whether or not this board can work together harmoniously on every issue remains to be seen.
Do you think they were like that out of fear? Out of fear that it only took a little bit of a ripple to start a tidal wave?
You know, it's interesting. In April of 2012, during my campaign, an effort was made to smear me in the Philadelphia Inquirer as a front page above the fold. And the headline read, "Polarizing Figure Emerges in Otherwise Quiet Race for Penn State Trustee." And it was hurtful because it was so untrue, particularly since there was a reference to personal matters. My daughters read that. But I recognized then that no trick was too low. I suspect for those who were engaged in that smear, largely Lanny Davis and a couple of other people, they understood dirty tricks, and it was probably out of fear because they thought by smearing me they could minimize the chance that I'd get elected, but instead I think they convinced people they needed to vote for me because they didn't want me on the board, the other people who were trying to smear me. But yeah, there was some level of fear. I'd like to think that the folks on that board now recognize that I work very hard and that I'm committed to being a good trustee. I think it's disingenuous to suggest, though, that 9 trustees are singular in our mindset. I think it's wrong to suggest that the only thing we're worried about is Joe Paterno and his wins. The fact of the matter is that this sordid affair has cost the university well north of $100 million. And if you don't think that impacts the cost of tuition, you're mistaken. And so it's important for us to make sure we resolve this.
Anybody who's actually attending a board meeting can actually see it, and I will point that out, that the alumni members do take a lot of flack because the focus in the national media is saying it's all on football. But if you attend a meeting, it is actually saying that you guys do discuss other issues, and it's more often than not the alumni members that bring up the current students. Like it or not, that just isn't the perception, but that's the reality inside the room. I want to get to Karen Peets is now off the board. Trustee Lubert is back on the board. A lot of alumni said you just replaced one cog with another cog, wash, rinse, repeat.
Well, no. I said this at I think upon further review earlier in the year, or actually the latter part of last year. I can't remember, these days run into each other, but I said that if there was one person, one trustee who did more damage to this university, it would have been Karen Peets, because the decisions that were made on her watch were at best questionable. Ira Lubert is a very, very bright, capable man. He's devoted a significant amount of resources to Penn State. Yes, he was on the board in 2011, and I don't agree with him on all the issues. But from an intellectual standpoint, he's certainly a big plus now that he's back on the board. You could argue whether any of the trustees from November 2011 should return to the board. I'm not going to get into that debate. I would argue, quite honestly, that the whole process by which trustees get on the board is subject to debate. So that would just be part of that discussion.
Talking about the Board of Trustees and the Senate bill, I know we've had Senator Utacek on here before. where do you think the Senate reorganization bill of the trustees is going to go, and what would you like to see happen?
Well, I'd like to see a smaller board, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think what will happen is that you will see a push to have us look a lot like the other state relateds, because the argument that Penn State has made throughout Senator Utachek's effort is that you can't do this to us. We're state related, and if you do this to us, you have to do this to Pitt, to Temple, and to Lincoln. And Senator Utachek and Senator Corman have not been happy with the leadership of Penn State, and I think the way they're going to deal with that is they're going to say that you guys want to be like the others. Well, okay, and that's what you're going to look like, and the representation on the board is going to be different than it is today. There may not be the classes that we have today on the board. So in the end, I think that will be the push that both senators make. Now, whether or not Senator Corman has the intestinal fortitude to move forward with that remains to be seen. His office has said that he's interested in a bipartisan effort. And I believe Jake. I've talked to Jake enough about this, but this is his region, Center County, and he has to deal with some of these folks more often than I do.
About 90 seconds left. President Barron, he was welcomed with open arms, took some flack early. What's the story with him, and what kind of part did he play in getting this consent done?
Well, on the latter, he was instrumental. He spoke with the presidents of the executive committee of the NCAA. He's been in touch with the presidents of the Big Ten. So he's played a pivotal role in what took place today, so he deserves credit. As for his report card to date, I think it remains to be seen. He's only been on the job for 7.5 months, and I think we need to give him a little bit more time. But clearly he's a man who understands Penn State.
Trustee Lubrano, thank you very much for stopping by. It's a fluid situation. We here at WHVL's For the Record will try to keep you abreast of all of developments, and we always try to keep you informed with the best guests possible. Thank you very much. Have a great day.